My guest is Maggie Keith, who is marketing manager and fourth generation steward at Foxhollow Farm in Crestwood, Kentucky. Maggie, how you doing today?
I'm great.
Good. Tell us a little bit about the history of Foxhollow Farm and your family's journey with the farm.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm a fourth generation steward, and that means that I'm the fourth generation to be on this farmland in my family. And first of all, I'd like to thank all the indigenous people that were here on our land before we came. And my mom and I are very passionate about calling us stewards rather than owners, because we do want to be good stewards of this land and care for this land for just like many generations before us and many generations to come will do. So technically, the way that my family started stewarding this land is my great aunt Margaret actually purchased the farm, the main manor house, in about 800 acres in the 1930s with her husband. And at that point, it was a dairy and grew some not crops, but feed for the animals. So some wheat and different grains for the animals. And then also my aunt had a kitchen garden, an apple orchard, and she loved doves. So she had some dove houses that still are around. And they didn't have any kids. And so my grandmother was very passionate about farmland and the woodlands. And so she ended up inheriting it from her aunt when she passed away in the 70s. And so at that point, it was still a dairy. But in the 80s, the dairy was not able to sustain itself. A lot of small dairies shut down in the 80s. And so at that point, my grandmother made the decision to lease the land to a 3-crop rotation farmer doing wheat, corn, and soybeans, and a whole lot of chemicals. And she definitely was, she was a vegetarian. She had an alternative health clinic. She thought very organically, ate very clean. She just didn't see how the farming operations could also be that organic. And so I inherited from her the notion of seeing where our food comes from and what's in our food. She just didn't happen to turn her farmland into that mission as well. So the 3-crop rotation farm was that way for a while until 2006, when my mom, aunt, and uncle decided to stop that lease. It had come up, there were 10-year leases, and it had come up at the 10-year, and they decided to stop that because in 2000, my grandmother got Alzheimer's, and my mom, aunt, and uncle, it was up to them to decide what to do with the family farm. Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of when I came in the picture. I grew up coming out here, visiting my grandparents. I remember running through the soybean fields and getting super itchy and sticky, and then playing hide and seek in the cornfields with my brothers. So I remember the crops well. And I remember not really having like a face to the farmer, not connecting actual farmers to our land. And that's something later I've digested and tried to think about, how even though I had a family farm, I had no connection to actual farmers. And so I'm the first generation of my family to actually farm the land. And so in 2006, we got our first 30 head of mama cows. And it was in July. I was still at Appalachian State University at that time. I came home to see that event and be a part of it. But then I went back to college, and it was my mom's vision, and my aunt and uncle were very much on board to create a biodynamic farm community. And around that, there would be the infrastructure was not there at the time because it was cropland, so there weren't fences and water. But the goal was to fence in the land, which was 700 acres at that time, that could be used for rotational grazing. And so rotational grazing of cattle is what my mom decided to do in order to take care of the land for mowing, aeration of the soil, also just fertilizing in general. She didn't actually start this thinking, I want to sell meat. She thought thinking, I want to heal the land. So I think that's where we found a lot of success, is that we are very mission driven. And our intention is to build a community and to heal the land more than just like take from the land and sell a product. But I was in business school at the time, and I said, we need a revenue source if we're going to keep this farm going for multiple generations. So I wrote a business plan to market and sell grass-fed beef here in Kentucky.
Well, many people assume that livestock are bad for the environment and for the climate. Aren't cattle a major contributor to climate change?
Many people do think that. And yes, the way that we're conventionally raising them in confinement is terrible, not only for the environment, but also the animal, the consumers who are eating it. So I would agree that if you are confining animals in a space and not using them to heal the land, then yes, it can be bad for the environment.
Mhm. What do you think about the effort to promote veganism and a plant-based diet as an ecologically positive choice? Not to disrespect anybody's choice if they're, there's like 3 different reasons to be vegan, but if it's ecological, then what is how would you respond to somebody who thinks that a plant-based diet is the ecological choice?
I would say some of us need to be plant-based and vegetarian, because ecologically, we can't raise enough protein to feed every single person. We actually can if we would eat less of it. I believe we should all eat less meat. We eat way too much meat that's sustainable for the environment. And so I'll start there. And I'm familiar with veganism. I have close vegetarian friends. I even have some vegan friends. And I believe that it's important to have a good balance, just like on a farm. You need diversity. We need people to have diversity in their diets too.
Right. Don't cows produce more than their fair share of methane, which is a greenhouse gas?
I'm sure they do. I'll go ahead and say I'm not a scientist or have a science background.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can put no study or science to this backing. And I know on our farm, in our specific environment, there is so much diversity that there isn't too much of anything. It's the balance is what we're looking for. That's very biodynamic too. I do know biodynamics, and there's plenty of science to back up biodynamics. But a big part of biodynamic agriculture is to have this like full loop system and to also have balance within that loop. And so I think where we could argue that there's too much methane or not enough of something or too much of something is when things are out of balance, it's not going to work. Just like our bodies. If our bodies are out of balance, we're not going to feel good. So.
Right. I mean, a concentrated animal feeding operation and, monocrop crops, it's just too much of something in a very small space. And, but what have you seen at Foxhollow Farm in terms of the increases in biodiversity over the years? What have you noticed in terms of pollinators, bees, butterflies, and birds?
A lot. It's interesting starting from where we were, which was right after we had a 3-crop rotation farm from 1980 until 2006. So that's a pretty long time to have a lot of monoculture on your farm. And so there was no topsoil, hardly any life other than in the woods. I will say I grew up in these woods, and there was a lot of life in the woods, but there's 500 acres of woodlands. Our farm now is 1,300 acres. I didn't include that in the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
but 500 acres of woodlands creates great biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
so I will say that has stayed steady and increased there, but where the cropland was, Mom and I spent a lot of time in those fields before the cattle came, and definitely recognized if above ground, there were hardly any birds, butterflies, bees, whatnot. But also below ground, there were, first of all, you couldn't dig because there was no topsoil.
Mhm.
And then second of all, if you could get a shovel in, then there was no life underneath the soil either. No worms, no grubs, no dung beetles, none of that. And watching it progress over the years, I mean, it's almost like after 10 years of doing this, it was just mind-boggling how much life you can physically see with your eyes compared to what it was like before. And so now we also have, flower farmers who give the pollinators, tons of things to have fun with, a vegetable farmer who has a lot of vegetables on land, an orchard. And so we have crops that are great for the pollinators and the butterflies. We plant milkweed, and we have, just wildflower valleys, huge valleys full of wildflowers to help the birds, bees, butterflies, whatnot. And so we're intentionally doing a lot, but also just having that diversity of cropland has also helped.
Some farmers and ranchers aggressively get rid of predators. Others do not see predators as a problem. No doubt others deal with predators selectively. What has been your approach in dealing with predators?
I would say our number one style of dealing with predators is a physical barrier. So if they're trying to get your chickens, have a very good fence. If they're trying to get our lambs, we've had issues with that, then we will have the lambs near a barn where they can go inside when they're lambing, have the ewes be near a barn. And the only time I would say we've had to use like guns or some, like literally kill the predator, is when we had this really bad issue with some birds that were attacking our calves and lambs. There were these buzzards. I can't remember the name of them, and I really should because we talk so much about them. But there are these buzzards that were teaming up, and the second a lamb was born, they could all come down and hurt it. And it was hard to find a way to solve that issue. I mean, watching documentaries like The Biggest Little Farm, you're going to see in biodynamic agriculture, you try to see where it's off balance. So like, for example, if there's tons of predators coming into your chicken house, well, what do they not have food elsewhere? What could satisfy them before they get to your chickens? And so trying to create physical barriers, but also a balanced approach has helped with predators as well.
Healthy living carbon-rich soils are positive in every way in terms of nutrition, flood control, and climate. I've seen reports that say for every 1% increase in soil carbon, the land can hold more than 20,000 gallons of water additional per acre. What is the soil like at Foxhollow Farm, and how has it improved over the years?
Oh, we have great soil. We had great soil before. That's why it was great cropland too.
Right.
But now, I mean, we have a ton of underwater natural springs. And so our soil is naturally like loomy and loose. It's not clay-like at all. And so, like, for example, we just went through a drought. And we have such deep roots and such so many like pathways in our soil where water can go, that while the drought was hard, it didn't totally destroy us. We did not have to irrigate. We did not have to feed hay, which some people with grass-fed animals had to do that during this latest drought. And so our soil is definitely incredibly rich, incredibly diverse, lots of humus. I'll attribute that to some of our biodynamic preparations. And just naturally being in Kentucky where we are, there are great grass seed banks in our soil. So we have great grasses too for pasture animals.
Right. When you have good soil, there's just so much, I call it plant available water. There's just so many you'd much rather have that water already in the soil because it's there from the last rain, because it's a sponge and it soaks up the water and keeps it for a long time, even through the worst droughts. If you have good soil, much
Yes.
rather have that. So anyway, preaching
Yeah.
the choir, I know.
No, that's what we're working towards.
Yeah. Um, Kentucky is home to the famed author, farmer, and social critic Wendell Berry. Wendell's daughter, Mary Berry, is active in the Berry Center, which seeks to empower farmers in sustainable and regenerative agriculture. Tell us about your working relationship with the Berry family.
Yeah. So Mary and I are, first of all, dear friends. She's the godmother of my son. She's in the first few years of starting Foxhollow, and still actually, I always say I call her when I feel like I want to quit, because sometimes it's very hard and you need to talk to someone. So she always is there to not only listen, but also give advice. And she is from a culture of farmers and a background that I really respect and don't have myself, and look towards others who do have that. And so I would say that Mary is a mentor, a friend, and just the Berry Center itself is, I feel like it's exactly the answer to what we need. We need to come up with systems that work. We need to be doing the work of Wendell Berry's writing, and that's what they're doing.
So speaking of Wendell Berry's writing, Wendell Berry wrote in his book, The Unsettling of America, that was 1977, 45 years ago. He says, the genius of American farm experts is very well demonstrated here. They can take a solution and divide it neatly into two problems. What is he talking about there?
So in that specific quote, it's actually, just to give some context, it's when he's talking about how the plants and the animals were raised together on the same farm. And once we sort of separated that and did all this monoculture, we just created more problems. We had, biodynamics speaks very well to this quote, especially like, don't make more problems by making it more complicated, by not looking at a farm as an individual organism that has different parts and pieces that need to be in balance. And so what I believe he's talking about is that you need to keep the plants and the animals and the woodlands and the pastures and all the farmers and the community. You need to consider all of those players, or else you're going to have a lot more problems. Like, for example, I'd even throw in there, not only did we separate the plants and the animals, but we didn't consider the farmer. We didn't value the farmer. And our community, we need to value the farmers and set them up for success so that they can be farmers and farm well. And that's a big part of the Berry Center, is how we have farmers who have generational knowledge of farming. They know how to farm well, but where are they going to sell it? And how are they going to get parity price? And so that's the work of the Berry Center that I'm interested in, is trying to help solve some of these systems. I mean, there was Foxhollow Farm. We raise the animals here on the farm. We have our own marketing and sales, and we distribute ourselves. So we're doing all of that work because there isn't a larger system in our state that is advocating for farmers and a fair price. So we had to advocate for ourselves. And if when I started this, I was 22 years old. I was young, naive, and thought I could do anything. Thank God, because I don't know if I would have the nerve to start this. Now that I've learned a little more and had a taste of the real world. And so the Berry Center is doing just that. They're trying to help farmers not have to solve that entire puzzle themselves.
So is Foxhollow Farm one family's attempt to get back to a more sensible approach to farming? Aren't you looking backward when we should all be looking forward?
Well, first, we should all be looking backward, just more backward. I mean, a big part of biodynamic agriculture is this respecting and similar to the way indigenous people grew food. I mean, they harvested from the woodlands. They cared deeply for the land and the animals that they were consuming. And so they, of course, wanted to build up an ecosystem rather than destroy it. And so I agree, we need to look way back. I mean, a lot of the way I was introduced to Wendell's writing was more through his fiction than his nonfiction. And I was craving that farming community where you could ask your neighbors questions. You could have that feeling of generational knowledge around farming. And so I think we need to look at, Wendell Berry's writing, not only nonfiction, but fictions, and see the way communities used to live. And I would say my family is very blessed to have the resources to try to figure this out. If we didn't have the resources we had, we would have never gotten to where we are now. And so this really is nonprofit work. This is work that the community needs to support, the state needs to support. I really believe that if we're just looking to the future and trying to, make things faster, better, more efficient, that's very industrial thinking, and that's not going to get us anywhere. And so I would say our family is more looking backwards. I mean, I would much rather have a mule and, the equipment I need to run a team of mules than the tractor that is constantly breaking down on me. So I'm looking back. And I think that is the way of the future. I think we need to go back to the cultural side and the community side of farming. And that's what we're building here at Foxhollow.
Is it realistic to think we can change the farming methods that are out of date? I mean, Maggie, how are we going to feed the world?
Okay, well, first of all, feeding the world does seem very daunting, but if more people would farm and more people would respect the land and appreciate the food that comes from the land, we can feed the world. I mean, that's how, let's talk about looking back. I mean, we used to be a culture where we all had gardens and we all had maybe a milk cow and whatnot. We've all just run to the city and forgotten about our rural places and where our food's coming from. So if we support our rural communities, then yes, we can feed the world.
Maggie, you're the mother of 3 children. No doubt you want them to eat as healthy as possible. What has been your thinking process in determining whether beef should be included as part of your children's diet?
Oh, great question. I feel like my 6-year-old son could answer this. When he is served, when we go somewhere and there's meat, he'll ask me, "Mommy, is that tortured meat?" And that is how I explained to him the way most meat is grown here in the US is it's tortured, to put it as simply as possible.
Right.
And so my kids do not eat meat unless they know the farmer, and they understand that concept very well. And it's an easy concept to understand. Anyone from, I have a 1.5-year-old, she doesn't talk yet, so she doesn't totally get it, but I would say my 3-year-old gets it. Like, oh, this chicken was raised by my friend Jared. I'm going to eat that. And then as our palates, they're little, but as their palates start to develop, I'm to the point where I'm like, first of all, I haven't had meat from a place that I don't know the farmer in, I would say 14 years since I started this. Once I found out how meat was raised, I was disgusted. I would have been a vegetarian if I didn't raise it myself. And so our palates will get to the point where we won't even accept the flavor of the meat that is out there. It's a disgrace to meat. I mean, we don't need to consume. We can enjoy a small piece of meat that was raised with respect and appreciate that farmer rather than just eat a giant cheeseburger.
Right. Foxhollow is a biodynamic farm. Tell me about biodynamics. What would you want a conscientious consumer to know?
Well, from the consumer's standpoint, biodynamic agriculture is definitely going to be a very healthy version for your body and for your health. And so there's not going to be, just like organics, there's not going to be any of the sides, any of the chemicals that go into non-organic farming. So you have that benefit. And then also you have the benefit of biodynamics goes a step further in that we make our own, we call them biodynamic preparations, but they are basically fertilizers that we make from things we find on the farm. So they're not going to be synthetic from somewhere else. It's going to be things like cow manure, like stinging nettle, chamomile, oak bark, things we find on the farm to make these tinctures that heal the land and grow great food. And so you're going to taste the vitality in the food as a consumer. I mean, as a farmer and as a biodynamic farm community, we are looking at our farm as a living, breathing organism that is individual to our farm. And so we're going to find a breed of cattle that work best on this land and with the grasses that we have and the climate and the topography. It's specific to this land. And so over the years, we've gotten our genetics down to be very specific to this land. And then we also are going to care for not only our cropland and our pastures, but also our woodlands and our water sources, our community in general. We work very hard to learn from each other, connect with each other, have that human element, have a balanced life where we're not working too hard, but also we have this great mission and drive that gets us up every morning.
You host a show on the local PBS network called The Farmer and the Foodie. How did you get started, and has that been a positive experience for you?
Yeah, so I met Lindsay about 12 years ago, and she's the foodie of The Farmer and the Foodie. We lived in the same condo building, and she would see me come home from the farm, dirty and with some random produce or egg or meat in my hands on the elevator, and started asking questions. And I started noticing she was cooking a lot and had me over to cook, and was an incredible cook, and simple though, not complex recipes, very simple cooking. And so we just started constantly talking, asking each other questions, and it led kind of to a joke of like, okay, well, Lindsay and Maggie are going to talk about farming and food all day. And my brother, ironically, he said, you all should have a podcast. And so he helped us get started in our, living room with a podcast. And then he is a realtor, Homepage Realty. And so he started filming us in kitchens that he was trying to sell the houses of, filming us do this cooking show in the kitchens. And from having a podcast, we were used to talking back and forth. And I guess neither one of us were shy of being in front of a camera. And so we did quite well. And a friend of a friend was a producer and saw it and pitched it to KET, which is our local PBS station. And now we're about to premiere season 3 in January. And we're right now in over 60% of the United States on the PBS stations. And we've filmed over 20 episodes of The Farmer and the Foodie. And it is an absolute delight. Right. Meeting farmers across Kentucky, learning about different farming methods, especially meeting generational farmers is where I find a lot of interest, because they have such knowledge that I crave. Not being technically a generational farmer. I have a generational farm, but I don't have farm family to ask questions. And so that would definitely be my favorite part. And of course, I get to eat whatever Lindsay cooks from what we find on the farm. So that's fun as well.
Yeah, I saw the episode where you went to Hopkinsville and there was a dairy farmer there, and
Willis,
and then Louisville Cream.
Yes.
That made me a customer of Louisville Cream. I went to Louisville Cream as a result of that episode.
I would too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Louisville is fortunate to have a locally owned chain of organic food stores called the Rainbow Blossom. How's your working relationship with the Rainbow Blossom?
Well, again, like my story with the Berry Center, my working relationship. Summer Arback is the second generation steward of Rainbow Blossom, and her and I are dear friends. She's one of my best friends. And so ironically, she happens to own a organic grocery store, and I happen to raise grass-fed beef, so it works out quite nicely. But as far as the business relationship goes, it's incredible. I mean, it's almost like a billboard for our farm. So people go and they see the Foxhollow freezer and they experience our meat, but then maybe they'll come out and see the cattle and see where their food's coming from. They'll come to one of our events and connect with our farmers and get to meet them, go on a hayride at one of our hayride and happy hour events. And so it's a great way to get the consumers that are in town to think about where their food's coming from. And Rainbow does a great job of promoting that as well.
Yeah, it's great to be able to go to one place that not only, you're pretty safe eating anything in here, but also it's locally owned. I mean, there's that giant big box, or supposedly organic food store that will remain nameless. And then there's Rainbow Blossom. Which are you going to choose? I choose Rainbow Blossom.
Yeah, I do too. And Summer's very involved in the independent grocery stores, organizations, and is a leader in that area. And so that's something else that I really respect her work. And I would say not only is she a dear friend, but her and I talk business quite a bit as well.
Assuming that organic and regenerative farming is good for the environment, why don't more people do it? What do farmers need in order to make the transition?
They need a system. They need parity price. They need a system to aggregate and distribute the products they're growing. I mean, just going back to the Berry Center, they have a program called Our Home Place Meats, where they are partnering with Henry County farmers where they are, and they are having them raise beef to their specifications, but in a way that they've been doing for generations. So it's not like they're trying to ask them to reinvent the wheel. They're just giving them a market to sell it to. And so those farmers are able to know their guaranteed price for the year, their guaranteed supply for the year. So they're told exactly how much they can grow and how much Our Home Place Meats with the Berry Center will buy. And so they're given a system that works. And if we could just replicate that system more, it's not, if you go talk to a conventional farmer growing wheat, corn, and soybeans, they're not like, oh, I really value, that I'm growing this wheat to go to a feedlot to feed an animal that's not even supposed to eat it.
Right.
It's not something they're going to talk about. They value their farmland, and they want to be able to produce something that can allow them to keep that farmland for generations. And we just need to give them a system to do that. They know how to farm, they farm well. And with some sort of way to sell a product other than wheat, corn, and soybeans, they really would. And that's one of the reasons I love to talk to all different types of farmers. I don't see a single person willing to do the labor it takes to grow food, or even wheat, corn, and soybeans. I don't even call that food. To grow something of the land and in a respectful way. I mean, we're not competing with each other. There aren't enough of us to compete. We need to lift each other up and try to come up with systems that make it so more young people want to farm, because there's an option of a business.
So there are other businesses on site at Foxhollow Farm. What are some of the other businesses?
Yeah, so the way we've built our Biodynamic Farm community is we have something called the Partner Grower Program, where we invite farmers who maybe don't have access to land or who want to live in a community, but have that farming knowledge and skill. We invite them to lease small plots of land from us, anywhere from 4 acres to 10 acres. Some people just do 2 acres actually. So, and we share equipment, knowledge, space. We have a packing shed, for example. We have tractors. We have a barn for storage, things like that. Coolers, freezers. So the infrastructure you need to farm. And they have their own business on the farm. So for example, Pavel's Garden is one of them. He's been here since 2006, since the beginning. And he grows produce for a CSA and also farmers market. And he is healing those 4 acres of land that he farms are in better shape than they could ever be because he's focused on those 4 acres. My mom and I can't focus on 1,300 acres. It's just impossible. And so to find these farmers willing to care for 2 acres, 4 acres, 10 acres, and really take good care of it, and then also make a business out of it where they can feed their family and make a living off the land. I mean, it's a beautiful relationship that it's very symbiotic. It's deeply respected. And that is how we've built up these partnerships. So we have Pavel's Garden, who does produce, and then Pure Pollen Farms does flowers. Duck Beat, he raises pork and chicken. And then also we have a commercial kitchen where he leases that and makes prepared meals and delivers them weekly to households. We have a orchard partner as well, where right now we're in the beginning stages where we're building up the orchard. So we don't have a ton of fruit yet and nuts, but that'll be a future business that's looking really well. We have some beekeepers that raise bees here and then sell the honey at our market here on the farm. And so our market also sells all the products that I'm mentioning here. And we also have partners that aren't necessarily on this farm, but neighbors that are growing good products like eggs, pork, bison. And then, so that's the farming side. And then we also have more the mind, body, spirit side. And so we have an office building, which was an alternative health clinic that my grandmother had started. And it's ebbed and flowed as to what it has been since then. We have a great conference space that we invite people of like-minded mission to come speak and offer education at that space. But then we have we call them healing partners. And so they do modalities such as Reiki, biofeedback, massage, yoga. We have a medium on the farm. We have a photographer who takes pictures of people in nature and then also of new mamas. It's really sweet. So we have a lot of different partners inside as well, focusing on the mind, body, and spirit, because that's a big part of our mission. It's not only to heal the farmland, but also to focus on the individual.
You enjoy your work?
Yes, clearly. It's hard to even call it work. I feel like I have a calling to this lifestyle and to this. I want to make change, and I have big goals, and I work every day towards that. But I also have this beautiful balance of being on a farm with my family, with my mom, my brothers. Like, we are a really close family, and I really can't imagine a life other than out here. So
what do you want to see happen going forward?
Well, my big goal is I would love to see systems in place so that no cattle, like not a single cow, calf, a steer, heifer has to be tortured in Kentucky. I mean, we have the farmland, we have the grassland. So what if all the meat, all the cattle that were raised in Kentucky, which we have the most cattle, anywhere east of the Mississippi. And so what if we had the most cattle and also was raised humanely, and it stayed here, and then that system could go to another state that raises a bunch of cattle. So cattle is definitely my passion. And I do think that's a goal that I could see in my lifetime. Another big goal of mine is to create this biodynamic farm that can last for generations. It doesn't need to look the exact same, but at least has the infrastructure and the systems in place that will allow it to thrive for many generations.
How can people stay in touch with you?
A fun way is to follow us on Instagram.
Okay.
I'm a visual learner, and so that's a fun thing to see. That's at Foxhollow Farm KY on Instagram. We have a website, foxhollow.com, where you can order the beef nationwide to be delivered to your house, or you can come out to our market and pick it up as well. Yeah, so that's probably the best way to stay in touch with us.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yes, thank you. I really enjoyed it.